Good morning, everybody. This is Michelle with Laughing Gardens, and I am super excited to talk to you guys about tomatoes today. Tomatoes are one of my favorite subjects because they are like the king of backyard gardening crops. What's so cool about them is that you can plant them. You can have small ones or big ones or purple ones. The biodiversity in the tomato family is just absolutely unreal. And they are so cool because who doesn't want to go to your friend or neighbor and hand them a white tomato or white salsa made out of your white tomato? Now, I get a lot of questions about, like, I grew this tomato and it was really small. I wish it were bigger. And so I kind of wanted to answer those questions. And I wanted to talk about how to grow a tomato from seed. So your first option is to choose a tomato plant. Now I really like a few different seed companies. My favorite right now is Baker's Creek. And these guys have just really, they have free shipping, and when you order from them, they will often throw in a free seed packet, and they're just super nice. And so that just kind of rocks my world. Another place that I order from a lot is Pine Tree. Pine Tree is more of kind of a bare bones seed company, so you'll get a lot less seeds in the packet, but who needs 100 tomato plant seeds? Really, you only need maybe one or two. And so Pine Tree tends to be less expensive, but they don't throw in free seed packets, and they take a little bit longer to ship. But they tend to be less expensive. The other company that I have ordered from an awful lot is Territorial. And Territorial is a Pacific Northwest company. They have all kinds of fascinating tomato varieties. They're really good at selling tomatoes and pretty much all the other vegetables. Super environmentally conscious, just really great company. So once you have your seeds, you need to get a planting tray, and you need to kind of start planning. So tomatoes are kind of a pain in the neck in that you have to start really in February or March planning your tomato garden. Tomato plants need 6 to 8 weeks before you even put them out to the garden. So you actually have to plan with a grow light, and you have to plan usually to make sure that your seeds stay warm. So I've got the greenhouse, and this is not a heated greenhouse, so I'm using a tomato seed mat, which winds up heating up the soil to the right temperature. And I'll use some inexpensive grow lights. I actually have a new variety of grow lights that I'm really excited to show you that are LEDs. But for now, but when those come in, I'll show you. But for now, I am just using cheap fluorescent lights. Put on a timer. Tomatoes are going to need about 12 to 16 hours of sunlight a day, or light. And unfortunately, in this atmosphere, that is just not possible. The sun rises and sun sets gives us about 10 hours of sun in February. And if you're a little bit farther, I happen to be in the Southwest. If you happen to be in the Northwest or the Northeast, or pretty much anywhere farther north, you will get less daylight during the winter. So in order to start tomatoes, you really need grow lights. If you don't use grow lights, what will happen is that your tomatoes plants will shoot up, and they'll become what's called leggy, because they're searching for that sun, and then they'll fall over and they'll die, which will be very sad for you because you've just invested time and energy into starting these tomato plants that aren't going to make it. I've tried so many times to get away with thwarting Mother Nature, and the truth is the tomato plants really need some extra sunlight. Once you have chosen your tomato seeds, and when I choose tomatoes, I like to have a lot of variety in my garden. I choose plants that are different in terms of when they're going to come ripe, and I like to choose really bizarre colors and bizarre shapes. So the first tomato that I will actually probably wind up eating is called a Tigerella tomato. This is from Pine Tree, and the days from transplant is 55 to 65 days. Now, one of the things that I get asked a lot about, or that really confused me, is what the heck does that mean? Because like 55 days from today, right now it's mid-February, would put me eating tomatoes in about 2 months. And so I'd be eating tomatoes in April, which we know is not actually going to happen. So what the days mean is actually from transplant. And in most zones, we put, or a good rule of thumb to transplant tomatoes is after Mother's Day. So my first tomatoes that I will be expecting to eat off of the vine will probably happen sometime in July, like probably a little bit after July 4th, if everything goes right. So the first tomatoes I'm going to grow are Tigrella tomatoes. These are like just a 2-ounce tomato that has like some stripes. So they're red tomatoes with some kind of yellowish stripes, which I totally dig because the weirder the tomato, the happier I am. Another tomato that I am going to grow this year is called the striped German tomato. And I'm really excited for that one because it's a yellow tomato, but it's also a huge tomato. And I'm just kind of curious as to how big a tomato I can get. Every year I try to put Cherokee purple tomatoes in my garden, and the reason is because I think that the story behind the Cherokee purple tomatoes is really romantic and beautiful. When we're talking about an heirloom tomato, it actually doesn't mean, I think people get really confused about heirloom tomatoes and what that actually means. An heirloom tomato isn't a bizarre looking tomato necessarily. An heirloom tomato just means that we have been able to grow the same tomato from seed for 50 years or more. So some heirlooms are really, really old and some are 50 years old, but we've grown the same tomato from seed for 50 years. That's what makes it an heirloom, which is a little bit different from tomatoes that get developed or that are hybrids. There are some really, really interesting tomatoes on the market that have been developed in the last few years. The Indigo Rose series is one of my more favorites because if you have seen these tomatoes, they are like the color of dark blue jeans, and they've been developed, which basically means that I've taken a tomato plant and I've chosen it for traits that I'm looking for, and I take that plant and I reproduce it, and then I take so if I'm looking for like a purple tomato, I will grow a tomato plant, and the most purple tomato I will take, and then I will make it have babies, or I will save the seeds, and then I will take the most purple tomato from that plant, and I will do that. And that's when we talk about like the developed tomato, which is a little bit different than hybrid tomatoes, which are when I take 2 different tomato plants and I crossbreed them, and they create this other incredible tomato plant. One of the more famous tomatoes that are hybrids is a Sun Gold. And so Sun Gold tomatoes taste really awesome, but if you save the seeds from Sun Gold tomatoes, they're not actually going to become true to Sun Gold tomatoes. So you have to buy those seeds every year, because they're essentially made kind of like I think it's a burro that's like a crossbreed, like from a donkey to a horse. Burros are sterile, something like that. This is how tomatoes work too. So back to Cherokee tomatoes. Cherokee purple tomatoes are really cool because the story goes that the Native Americans grew these years and years before the land was settled. And at one point, when the Trail of Tears happened, the one guy grabbed his tomato seeds and put it into a medicine basket, a medicine pack, and wound up carrying it all throughout the Trail of Tears, and it made it to the end, and then it continued to grow. So I try to grow this one because it's an awesome tomato and it's got a beautiful story and it makes me really happy. Let's see. I am also super excited about this tomato cream sausage tomato because hello, white tomato sauce, which sounds amazing. And then I've got some black tomatoes. And so basically what I'll try to do is plant them so that they make tomatoes for me all year. Does that make sense? Cool. So planting tomatoes are pretty easy. You just want to make sure that the seedling mix is nice and moist. The reason, now, the way that people talk about like seedling mixes and how important that is kind of up to you. So basically what a seedling mix is when you take soil and you bake it so that there is no microbes, there's nothing in that soil, so that if anything bad is in there, they won't actually attack your newborn plants. So that's why we use seedling soil. It often really has a lot of pumice in it, so that it's really well draining soil. So I will use seedling soil most of the time, but every once in a while I run out of that soil and have had a lot of luck with just using regular potting soil or just soil from the dirt. Plants really do want to grow. Now, I don't know about you, but I am kind of a lazy gardener when it comes to doing things like labeling tomato plants. So many, many years I have had tomatoes that I have had no idea what the heck they are until they actually make it to tomatoes. And even then I have no idea what this tomato is. So a few years ago, it occurred to me that there's an easier way rather than writing out 2 million different labels. Especially if I only want like 6 plants of each. And for me, 6 plants is actually a little bit much. In my garden, I will plant probably between 15 and 20 tomato plants because I want to have plenty to can and plenty to give away, and plenty to eat all year. So, my tomato plants are crazy. Like I've chosen a whole bunch of different varieties, and I want like probably 2 of each of those varieties, which means that I have this flat of seeds that have a whole bunch of different tomatoes in it. And I want to actually show you how I've labeled it. So I have 2 young boys, and these young boys play with Legos a lot. And so what I did was I pilfered through their Lego collection, and I just put a different color Lego in each of the seeds. Then I put the seeds in there, and then I put that color Lego in the seed packet. So when I'm curious or when I'm up potting tomatoes, I will be able to label it then. But for right now, I just know that all of the red Legos are Tigerella tomatoes. And if I forget, I will open up the Tigerella tomato packet and be like, oh yeah, that was red. Now, one of the interesting things about tomato growing is that once the tomatoes start, which will happen in about a week, you'll watch these little tiny plants and they'll be so cute and you will love them, and eventually they'll grow out of their pot. Now, tomatoes are this incredible plant that doesn't really mind being transplanted as long as you're fairly gentle. So I will usually put like 2 or 3 seeds in a pot, and you can either thin them, which is totally cool. You just cut the little tomato plant off and thin it, or you can try to separate the 2 tomatoes. And I've had actually a lot of luck doing that. I know that a lot of gardeners will recommend against doing that, but for me, I've had no problem with it. So basically, I'll take a bunch of 4-inch pots, and I will up pot the plant sometime in late March, so that it's got another month or 2 to continue to grow. And once we have the full tomato plants, then we can start talking about putting them in the garden. But we've got at least 3 months, February, March, April, into May, 3 to 4 months for these guys to grow in the greenhouse or in my kitchen, depending upon how hot things are. So this has been how to start a tomato garden, and I am so excited that you guys have joined me. I'm going to sign off for now and get to planting, and I can't wait to see what plants you decide to grow too. Thank you.